Okay. This goes today. Hopefully, we produce the wine, but no. Hey, Thorolf. How you doing? Welcome. Mm. Not streaming for so long. It seems disconnected to the start of a stream these days. I'm doing good. I'm doing good. I'm going to try and get as much of a streaming as I possibly can before starting work today. Uh, I work in PHP, so my I have worked in .NET for the last 20 years, almost, but I moved to a PHP job last year, so this is my .NET break. So right now, I am focused on trying to decide how I want my data access against Couchbase going. I've used PHP. So PHP was actually I started working in PHP before I started .NET back back in the dark old days of like the early 2000s. And I didn't use it professionally, but very much. But I did build some sites, and I built my own framework and stuff like that. You know, the things that we do. And I decided to just focus my energy on my .NET stuff. So I spent most of my career working in .NET. And then last year I had the chance to change my role, um, and I got a job working as really as a software architect, but the team has needed developers, so I've kind of been filling in the developer role for the past year in PHP. And PHP has evolved. Um, it's a lot better than it used to be, but it's been influenced by all the other languages. You know, they all borrow and whatnot from each other to help make it more accessible. So yeah, I'm going to have to go do my first puppy break though. So throughout the stream, I will have to run a BRB because I have two 6-month-old puppies who I'm currently watching destroying a couch on a camera. So I'll be right back. On. Back. Okay, I'm back. One more hole in the couch. Okay. So yeah, PHP Um, we're still using an older version of PHP right now, but I've had the chance to use some of the newer stuff. I kind of like it. There's some features I do like. I do like um, traits to some respect because you can kind of compose uh, rather than inherit. That's kind of nice. And yeah, ah, it's funny. People who work in PHP, I think there's a bit of what's the word? Um, Stockholm syndrome going on. Because every time I criticize any PHP code to any of the developers, they're like, "This isn't this isn't normal PHP. This is not a good example of PHP." Like, but most of the PHP I've seen is this way, and what I think it is well, apart from the fact that they're committed to a language, so so they're going to defend the language, but the way that you develop with PHP, it's kind of like, to me, it's kind of like Blazor, right? It kind of blurs the lines between what is client and what is server because you're echoing out and you're putting out. So it ends up with sometimes you make some really weird choices. And unless you use a very well established framework and use it perfectly well, you still end up in this world of, am I in the client? Am I in the server? And Blazor is that for me as well, right? In that the whole code block, the whole, the web forms approach to it's kind of, I kind of like the distinction of an API and a front end. It keeps the two separate and nice and clean, and you can focus on different things. And with PHP and even Blazor, it's harder to do that. So, and I think it's, you know, definitely a learned approach to how to write PHP. You can write clean PHP, but yeah, it's a learned approach to how to do it, and then people end up defending it. So yeah, so yeah, it's a challenge. So what I'm trying to do here, by the way, is I have I'm prototyping an architecture as a whole, right? I'm tinkering with the pieces. I'm trying to build out a rough state. I'm not trying to hold to any clean architecture level like designs. I'm not trying to hold to DDD. I'm not trying to do anything like that. Right? That's not my intention. I am I am someone who's learned as I've grown. I've never been to school for software development, so and I'm not a very good look at something and just follow what they do sort of thing. So I've always gone my own path, and I gauge my feeling about the software as I go, and I try and keep it clean, I try and keep it tidy, and I try and make it, more importantly, maintainable for me. So I'm kind of prototyping out an architecture here to see how I feel about a project I'm about to start working on, or have been working on for several months with this. Um, so I'm just trying to get a feel for the different pieces. So the way it works is I'm trying to build basically a Jira, a workboard, but I'm trying to add the things I think I'm missing from these things on top. So things like notifications and visibility are lacking in a lot of what we do day to day. We person A picks up a task, works on a task, needs person B, requests it from person B. Person B adds a task into their own board if they're doing it right and tracks it, or they go off and do it and they get squirreled away, and no one knows what they're working on. Right. So I'm kind of trying to introduce a concept of sharing this information between boards so that when it does become someone else's responsibility, it's still visible where it was from and it's visible where it's going to. And I'm kind of working towards that design. So right now, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get all the architecture stuff out of the way to make sure that I'm comfortable with how it would work, rather than developing all that afterward. Because what happens is, if you're developing an application and you are trying to build the, you don't have a clean design, right? I'm not, going through every step of story planning and refinement and whatnot. But with personal projects, what often happens is we're doing the technology at the same time as doing the coding. And that leaves us struggling at times, because if we hit a roadblock in the technology, we may make a horrible decision, right? We may make a decision to scrap an entire thing just because we struggle with it or we want to move on, or we get stuck on that and the project fades. So I'm trying to get the technology aspects figured out, test with the different pieces I want to use, see if they do everything I want them to do, and then come back along and decide, what are the true things I'm actually doing in this architecture? What are the actual things I'm doing, and build the stories out so I can tackle it more like a real project. And once I get to that phase, I can start adding stories in. I'm using Space as my story tracking thing right now. But once I get enough development done, I will be able to dog food this entire platform. So what I'm tinkering with today is I'm working with Couchbase. Couchbase is giving me some features that Mongo doesn't. Mainly, it's giving me the ability to tenantize a bucket. So if I go over here and go to localhost 1891, I think it is. So if I go to here, so I have a bucket, right? Now, in the database layer, when I have tenantized data, right now I'm using the tried and true method of having the tenant identifier on the data record, which works kind of. But what Couchbase allows me to do is scope data within a bucket. So I can have the same set of collections in multiple scopes, but these are per tenant. So this is the tenant identifier, right? So when I create a tenant, I register all the information, right? And I add the users, add the addresses, etc. I publish an event. That event is picked up by a Kafka consumer, and then creates the actual scope for this tenant in the bucket that I need. So I kind of like this way of thinking about things. And if Couchbase Enterprise actually provides access control at these levels, right now Couchbase Community only provides me the ability to say I'm allowed to access this data or I'm not. Right? But it works. And again, we've got this information going in. But my biggest problem with any NoSQL database is the access patterns are nowhere near the same as SQL databases with ETL. So I want to make sure that the data access stuff is consistent and makes sense to some extent. So I'm trying to tinker with here is, do I put the work of establishing the database, the bucket, inside of my actual code, or do I make it a responsibility of the data layer itself? And Couchbase does add a little bit more of a twist in here as well. And that Couchbase does have NiSQL or N1SQL, whatever it's called, right? N1QL, it's called. So you can actually write a query against Couchbase. So you can actually do SQL syntax against Couchbase, and it will work. So yeah. So I have Couchbase's try Couchbase.net code. I actually just made a PR for this to update to .NET 8, but they do have some example code, and I'm trying to avoid this, if I'm being honest. It works, it does what it needs to do, but to me, it's not the most readable. So yeah, anybody watching, I'm not opposed to opinions or feedback. I am not I'm not under some weird belief that I know everything I'm doing, and 20+ years of experience does not necessarily mean I am perfect. So I wish it did. It makes things so much easier. So I pulled all this code because initially this was in the work item context, right? So I'm kind of tinkering with this unit of work concept, because the unit of work, I'm trying to say, hey, it's scoped to the scope of the tenant, right? Which makes it easier because I can just interact with collections then and not have to care about, oh, which tenant am I with? Get the scope for the tenant. Everything is kind of simple that way. So I kind of created the Couchbase unit of work. The problem being, it kind of then ends up with Couchbase unit of work being a big dumping ground for all the functionality of interacting with the collections. I'm kind of tinkering with what does it mean. And what I'm doing here in the tenant created handler is I'm trying to say, okay, get the cluster, right? Get the bucket, which is in this case work items, then create two collections, tickets and tenant information. Then go and store the tenant information we've been provided into that tenant information collection. So the idea being that if I'm querying the data, I can get tenant information from this database without having to bridge to other APIs. Okay. Puppy break number 2. We've lasted about 20 minutes. Maybe. I'll be right back.
Okay, back. My apologies for that. So, yeah, if anyone joining, I have two small puppies. If they cry to go out, I can't really just wait because I'm trying to train them to be telling us. So, I can. So, anyway, tenant created. Hey, Dota, good morning. How are you? My apologies for not being able to jump in your stream yesterday. Um, Unfortunately, not able to get to a computer. Good. How'd it go? Get stuff done? Oof. Gotcha. Anything auth or wiki related can get messy. Okay. So, how do I want to do this? But unit of work kind of makes sense because I'm going to have a I want it scoped to the tenant, which makes sense. In this instance, in the initialized tenant stuff, it's a bit different than normal because see how it's used. So in the application command add new support ticket. See, that doesn't look horrible. That's not terrible. That works. So this is how I'm using that begin. I'm getting the context in the tenant, and then I just add a ticket, right? I don't need to keep adding the tenant every time. It's done for me because that's put in the right scope. So this is kind of what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to figure out how clean I want the API to be. What does the code look like normally? I don't want to end up in a world of just jamming things into places. So kind of makes sense to give more control to this piece, but it doesn't really belong with work item context because then work item context is doing all the things, right? That's not a job of the work item context. The work item context is just to give it a scoped instance of Couchbase in this case. So the unit of work gives us get, add, delete, etc. This is where this is going to get messy once they start to get into more complicated scenarios, because the code for Couchbase does look like this. Query async. So we can write SQL queries. There is no .NET EF Core adapter though. Took a look at that yesterday. Figure out the actual query structure later. Again, I may use Couchbase for many things. I may use Couchbase for nothing, but I want to give it a fair shake. And Couchbase, again, does give me the ability to separate the data at the bucket level in scopes, so tenant level below bucket level, which means that the collections are distinct, the collections are self-contained, etc. And I have quite a clean interface there. Whereas with SQL Server, I'm putting in a tenant identifier. So Yes. So I am separating the data. I'm not following any sort of microservices practices or anything. I'm not just focusing on uh, controlling the data right now. So it's this code that I need to decide where it lives. And it's quite a technical problem. I will have to do this over and over again, right? So as I add new things, I will have to add more preparation to collections. I don't, I don't think the, I don't know if there's a problem with Couchbase with adding the document, because when I added the tenant information, I turned around and tried to query it. It wouldn't work unless I create the index for it, right? So if I have to do this for every collection, as I add the first document or as I query it, then I really do want to consider um, that design, right? Yeah, it does have. Oh, because I don't have anything. I don't have the IntelliSense. I don't want to include the library right this second. I'm trying to. I'm moving it around to see where it fits. Right, where does it? To me, where does it naturally feel? Um, good. I'm not sure how to do. Oops. The data twist now. Yeah. And again, anytime you jump into a new technology like this, right? Um, NoSQL as a general concept isn't new to me, but the whole Couchbase API stuff is. And as I go to use it, as I go to stretch it a little bit, that's when I'll find those things where, oh yeah, now that makes sense. Right. Unfortunately, we've got to relearn those lessons over and over and over again. So yeah. So what makes sense here? I kind of like to remove. I, so the problem we're doing it this way is this is very Couchbase heavy, which means that my consumer layer becomes very, very concentrated on Couchbase, right? The data layer contains Couchbase. I'm okay with that. Um, but how do I represent this in a clean way? Because, I mean, application or consumers knows about data, but the initialized tenant is. I don't think Couchbase. I had issues, so I've clearly got that from somewhere. The plans, the future. It goes into ad break and people immediately. Um, 30 seconds on the ad. So I clearly got it from somewhere that you have to add the index when when adding the document. Create primary index on airline. So it's reasonable to believe that I'll need to create the collection and add an index, but I'm only adding the index in this case because when you create the collection, it has no concept of type, right? That's kind of the way that NoSQL is, right? It has no concept of type here. So the only time I have something to index is when I insert a record. But is this more of a query concern? Right? Does it matter that I've added the data? Does that matter more that the queries are ready on that object? Seems like there's a lot of configuration and setup for Couchbase just to make it do simple things. Don't query so hotels index. This assumes there's an index available. My issue with this sort of sample code though is, right, a lot of people pick up this code and this becomes their application, right? And I get it, you've got to try and represent how to use the tooling at the same time as trying to keep it light, because if you do it too heavy, you lose people and make it look more complicated than it is. So they have a travel sample bucket that they create an inventory scope, and then they create a hotel under the inventory, right? And this is this is the Couchbase service starting up, and then they go and get a collection. I'm back on a puppy break. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. My apologies. No worries, Doctor. Thank you very much. You're still there. Appreciate it. Okay, so yeah, unfortunately, this is going to be broken up quite a lot, I would imagine, over the next couple of weeks. The dogs are getting used to schedule and whatnot, and with Christmas and whatnot coming up, that's going to be even harder. So I'll do what I can. So it's clear from this that this does initialize the data when starting up. No, it gets it. It gets the data. It doesn't create it. That doesn't create the collections. It gets the collections. Is just doing to do it? No, it actually grabs them as actual things to interact with when we inject it. Okay, so when you inject it, okay, it gets all the collections it needs. Flight service. We query it. We do not specify an index when we query it. So tools like RavenDB and Mongo, I believe, create indexes on the fly. So they kind of have default indexes created on them. But I know that I did try and query a Couchbase collection pretty quickly, and I got an immediate, no, there's no index. But maybe I can get far enough, and then I can try and pull Matt Groves into a conversation, maybe one day. But either way, this code here does not belong at this layer, right? Because it's my application layer. I do not want to specify a whole lot of Couchbase behavior in this layer. That is not where that should live. It should live down here. Let's do this. Let's try something. Let's try design, right? Let's create initializers. Create user. Paste that in there before I use it for my clipboard. Right. Okay, got that there. So here's the name for this pattern. But either way, what I kind of want to do is detour params enumerable of initializers, and then that, yeah. Public abstract then we'll do public abstract class our own. So we do everyone else's and our own. This will be null if it's so if initializers 9. Yes, because we're passing nothing. Do this. Okay. Pass. Work item is 10. Output type. Yeah. And substitute. Like that. Turning. Initializers. Right. That's good. Initializers provided. Liza station. Well, really what I want to do. Public void arrange void detour arrange. So I like to organize my unit tests in I don't like to put arrange act and assert all inside of my assertions, inside of my facts. I prefer to set up the arrange and act separately so that the fact is visible cleanly. It's just my preference. I've kind of landed on this over years of looking at other people's tests. Good or bad, right or wrong. Okay, so for this, all I need to do is public class mock initializer. Part knows exactly what I need. We'll reference data, right? We'll pass that down to the base, and then we need to do actually those going to be fine. Right? My understanding is value task will not assign memory all the time. So if it doesn't actually become asynchronous, it will not allocate memory for it. So it's slightly more efficient. So you want to do initialize. So the way I'm heading here is what I would do is I create a tenant initializer, which would pass in the collection initializers. So then at the code level, I would literally do this. Await context initialize maybe, and then I'd pass in a new tenant initializer, and in there I'd say new ticket collection initializer, new kind of information initializer, right? And then as I add more collections, I literally add the initializer and add it in here and can repeat the pattern of how I interact with Couchbase, but then also keep Couchbase away from here. And from a readability perspective, it should be pretty obvious when you hit this code what it's doing. That will kind of be where I'm going to head right this second. So let's write the test to make sure that the behavior is as we expect. I mean, I don't see it being wrong, but yeah. So I want to assert that public int property 0 property plus not valid. I need to return default. So it doesn't matter that it's asynchronous or not in this case. So now we need to create a public mock initializer. Then actually the implementation does not need to be public. That needs to be protected because the only public method is initialize. The internal implementation is built there, so we don't need to do that. So thank you, Ryder, for helping me out there. So let's do this. And again, anyone watching, if you don't like what I'm doing, if you want to have an opinion on how I should do this, or you think that this is, you want to understand it more, feel free to ask. I'm completely open to questions still. Okay, so initializer in the mock initializer, then initialize await initializer initialize. So run async the act, then initializer dot property dot the dot equal expected public int expected property 5 is 1. Okay, so we have buildable code. I really should do on my BRAP back screen, I should actually put pictures of the puppies. That way. They'll settle right now. Good. Okay, so the purpose here is soft.NET install. FFTK. Work items tests. It's updated now as well. but it is in work items tests. Get all that tab down. Open it up again. Not runnable, it's not installed. I beg to differ. .NET test SDK. Okay, not where I want to get stuck today. Not where I want to be. What am I missing? Rider, what? Recognize, Microsoft. I have a memory of a goldfish. .SDK. Oh. Nope, follow results. Project. Load the project. Yeah, initializer implementation is invoked. Okay, so that's when no nested initializer is provided. When nested initializers provided. Fact, initializer is invoked on nested. Initializer is invoked on initial. Wow. Not really. Project board. Arrange. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go and break the initializer implementation, right? So all I'm going to do is initialize the first one. So I want to make sure that my test passed for the right reasons. So if I was doing this the right way and starting with test driven, I wouldn't have written this before I wrote this. But okay, so we're going to create another mock initializer. It's remembered what I did last time. Awesome. Do I want to do the same thing? Each one would be one. I do not. I want to int we can actually clean this up a bit with .NET int property rams initialize. No, that doesn't do what I want it to do. I don't like that design. That makes it messier. So property is why move the default now. So I can create each initializer, pass in an initial value, and then validate that they are all incremented appropriately. And the reason I'm recreating this rather than using this is because their implementations are slightly different, and just because they're called mock initializer doesn't mean they should be shared between the classes. Creating this sort of stuff, I wait until I've got it in enough places in unit tests to know that it is not changing and it does not need to change per test. Because what happens if you start to build these large objects up that are your tests become dependent upon, you run the risk of modifying one and test passing or not passing for weird reasons. So yes, it seems like repetition, but it's more isolated and the test is now independent of the other test entirely. So we need to create, let's do 3 initializers. Public initializer, public, holy crap. Almost Copilot, almost. Second initializer, initial. I suppose it's taking that context and building out the variables. Okay. Yeah, I'm kind of telling it my intent. So it's just a little bit, okay, you can assume that that's what I want. So in my arrange, my initial, I don't want to do it that way. So we're going to start that with 1. And then we're going to do that. That's going to be 2. That's going to be 3. There's a name for the pattern, and I cannot remember the name of this pattern to save my life right a second. So that should happen. Now, what we want is private const int expected initializer, initial, probably divide 2, 3, 1, 4. Yeah. Okay. What am I thinking now? So we do need these actually as that is a weird way of seeing it. I mean, it kind of works in terms of visualization. Will that do what I think it will? So assert dot equal expected initial property value and initializer property, and then yeah, and then yeah. So we're going to invoke the initialize on the root, the initial initializer. Root initializer. With that, it saves repetition. So the root initializer takes the nested and the second nested initializer, and then should invoke initialize on. So this one should pass, this one should fail. Object reference, because I did not create my instructor, in which I need to do arrange, then act. There we go. So initialize is invoked on the root. It's not invoked on the nested. Okay, so now let's go put that code back. Again, I could get to the end of this and scrap it, right? It's not
determined that this is going to be my final design. It's just I want to try and make sure that I have a clean way of representing the actions I'm performing. So I'm just trying to come up with what that design is through trial and error. And I kind of do like to start with this style of code, right? I kind of start with what would I like to read it as. If I can um, if I can read the code and it makes sense again, then I'm happy because then I don't have to dig through and figure out what's going on all the time. I can trust, based with tests and everything else, that things are doing what they should do. So let's run this again and we should get passes. Yeah. So now let's go back and actually, that's infrastructure. So let's create some initializers. So these are the actual implementations, right? That's the concept. So if I like this concept, I'll move that out to a shared library rather than having it in one child library. So let's look at the actions that we need to perform. Where'd I put them? So initializing a tenant starts with a problem actually. Starts with a broken design. So if I do it this way, I have no dependency injection, right? Because I'm manually creating everything, which does mean that I don't have any of the dependencies I'm going to need. I could require them. So I could, all you need to give us a context in here, and maybe it's part of this. I could require them. But then I have to pass them in here. Now I have the context that I'm working with, but that feels clunky because if I'm going to call it through here, if I get away with that, that's there as well. I don't want to pass context in there because that doesn't feel logical, right? Why would I pass the context in that I'm going to initialize? Maybe. What do I do? What do I do? I like this concept. This works for me. The behavior lives in the actual initializer. Which trigger then I cannot remember. There's a name for this part. Can't remember it. What do I call this? What do I call this? What do I call it? So let's try and implement it and see what happens. Okay, so this is a new tenant. and it's going to be an initializer. It takes that. Because the base can be null, I don't have to pass down any further initializers, so that's probably not a design I want to do. But if I do that, I break the implementation of that. So we need a provider, we need configuration, we need do it. That's impressive. You pulled that from a comment, and you know it's in the context of what I'm doing. Okay, I'll take it. So this is the cleaner way in this case, because I know the initializers that I'm going to do. So then the code here would, instead of that, it would look like new tenant initializer event dot tenant identifier event dot company name. Right. So it would work because this does know that as part of that thing, we're going to do these other things, right? But again, we have a dependency injection problem. I lasted over 20 minutes, I think, since my last puppy break. I'll be right back.
And I'm back. Okay. See if I can get to the screen. Okay, so this generally works in theory, but I have dependencies that are going to make it a struggle, right? Because I have a dependency on my provider, right? So I need a Couchbase provider, and I need my configuration to be able to set my timeout. So the reason I'm setting the timeouts is I learned pretty quickly that without these weights, Couchbase doesn't have itself all in order straight away the moment you establish the connection. So you've got to wait for it to be ready to actually go and write information. Because what would happen is this would go through and it'd error here trying to write the next piece. So this behavior would not be part of this, which is good, right? That would go into this one, which would be fine. And that behavior would live, this would be this, that would live in there. So that's okay. So I'll do like the separation that gives me, right? It breaks those two things up and then I can chain them together. And I can take this part away. Yeah, I can take these away. I just need the scopes. Right? So because that becomes part of that. Right? So that becomes part of that. And no, wrong order. Wrong order. That becomes part of that. Then that becomes part of that. What we can do is create a collection initializer that has some of these common behaviors once we figure it out. So this way, again, this piece would live in here. So I'm liking the general path because I'm liking the fact that I'm breaking up the actions into several components. They are specific to what they're doing. Right? So this establishes the scope. That's all this is left with doing now, right? So this just creates a scope. Unit testing this, by the way, would be impossible. So I'm not even trying to do that right a second. I have no idea how to mock some of these things up right a second. So I will. Maybe I do. But again, I don't know what I'm doing. So it's easier to write the code and learn what I'm doing than it is to try and write the unit tests first in this instance. I probably should back over it though once I've got it established and then verify with unit tests that it's doing everything I need, because then I can spot a break quicker. So we have new tenant initializer. And, you know, of course, being a consummate professional, I made sure that I committed before I did anything, created a new branch, etc. Oh, no, I didn't. I've got a whole lot to undo if I break this. Okay, so this in theory works. However, there's definitely some challenges, right? Because it's not dependency injected. Because it's not dependency injected, I can't have this, right? So we need this to either be dependency injected or have some crazy access to global behavior. Not global behavior, not what I'm thinking. Some kind of all-knowing class that has access to all the pieces I need. I don't like that design either. This works visually, but I think this can't be invoked. On it, this can't be created on its own. I think this has to be invoked from something like the context, right? So the work item context. So this provider is this cluster provider, right? This gives us access to Couchbase cluster. The configuration is associated with that, I suppose. So those are both injected in. Couchbase configuration is my class. There is one internally to the cluster provider using the same exact object. So I mean, everything past we have the cluster. Yeah, we need to create the scope. That's the only difference there. That's the only additional piece, right? To begin unit of work. Maybe I don't need this piece. Because if I'm testing the scope exists, scope async gets a scope from the bucket by name. What happens if the scope doesn't exist? What happens if the scope does not exist? One of the difficulties of this as well is that the amount of code I have to set up to even test something is horrendous. But where I'm leaning right now is some form of begin some form of either dependence. So initializers are not necessarily that will mean that has to be invoked from the parent classes, the child classes. So the initializer is not a Couchbase specific thing at this point, but I need Couchbase specific behaviors inside of it. I need I'm going to come back to here. What do I want? How do I want to invoke this, and what will do what it needs to do? So, I kind of wait context dot not initialize tenant, right? Initialize. Is it? Is a collection initializer or a very specific to this one task? I won't do this anywhere else. because if I do that, then this code becomes responsible for figuring out, oh, you need to inject this and resolve this. But then I need to put a dependency resolver inside of my context because the context is now past constructions. So then I need to put a type provider in here, right? So service provider, right? That would give me that. And then if I had on the task, the task, initialize, right, where is an initializer, right? Then that works. And then in the method, activate the instance is not what I want. I need to do service provider dot get required service. It has to be required. Initializer. Right. And then I call initialize on it that way. That means I get dependency injection. But now what I lose is the arguments. Right? How do I pass the information? That's great. I can call it. I can do the I. I can now have access to my I cluster provider. Right? But then I won't get these. And I can't do that because I have to resolve those. So if I had again, this hasn't left this namespace, right? This is still Couchbasey, right? In the I can make this specific to the Couchbase needs. So what if that took params object args? That took that. That took that. What is the problem with that? Well, the problem is that we now have a heavy dependency on the order of arguments, which means that if I pass in the tenant identifier and then the tenant name, public abstract class initializer. This that needs to be eyes. This would function kind of, but the top level would have to have all the arguments for all the children, and then the children would have to know the offset in the array of arguments as to which ones they cared about. That's janky, because then you end up writing defensive code inside of individual initializers saying, hey, if this argument looks like this, then I don't want this. And, because then if someone changes the interface or goes in and thinks, you know what, I can just, because you're doing it this way, right? This would have to have params object args. And this would in general work, right? Because now we could do these two. This will compile. This will work. And then in here, we have params object args. So we're still good. And we can pass that down there and everything works. Right? We don't need in our tenant initializer, we don't need them. Right? And these we could figure out in a second. Right? But the purpose being, no matter how I initialize these, if I, the array of extra initializers, etc., each one of these then has to be injected, and each one needs to know about which initializer came before it or after it, or whatever. Because, yeah, and then if you decided to change that order, right, and you switch this up here, and the parameters just so happen to work, you're going to get a strange bug. Right, because let's say I put tenant identifier toString at some point, and or company name, or bring something else in there, right? I bring in a different piece of information, and I change the order, and they still work. You could end up with the address as the company name, and the company name as the address. So you don't want to do that. That's a really weird side effect bug that you would fail to see at compile time. You'd potentially fail to see it at testing time if things didn't initialize in the right order, or things didn't initialize the way that it showed. Well, then you'd see a production bug where people be complaining that their address was in their company name. But don't want to do that way. And also, this limits my dependency injection scope to the first one, right? Because only the first one is DI. Everything else is done. Another way of doing this would be in here, I take a tenant information initializer, tenant information, and a ticket collection initializer, right? So they go in there now, and then ticket, right? I need the specifics, right? Because then my initializers will be injected and passed down. Params object args, right? So now this in theory works. We don't have that yet. We could also have Couchbase configuration, right? That's that. But now we have this, right? So args 0. Then we're going to guarantee that's not null. So our initial one would work in theory, because we can say initialize with this new tenant initializer. New tenant initializer does the dependency injection because it's scope from the provider, the work item context, and it will fire this, and then it will fire these in the wrong order. Annoying bug number two. I have a dependency on the order things are done in. So my initializer code needs to flip because I need to do my own thing and then do my child arguments. However, this still doesn't take away from that, right? Still doesn't take us anywhere further with this. So I think what I'm ending up doing here is moving more and more away from a clean understanding of what's happening, right? So the more I hide things or inject things, etc., the harder it is to understand what these things are actually meant to do, right? And this is really bad. But what about a different API, right? What if I do await context dot, what if I do something similar to that? And then I do then with and then do event.company name. What if I can do that? So I build the logic up here. It's obvious. These parameters are scoped to the actual thing they're working with. They don't have to go down into others, right? I've created a fluent API. So a new tenant, then initialize the tickets, then initialize the tenant information. And then that would take, that doesn't care. These would be scoped. That's the weird thing. So once I've got this, once I've got create scope async, right, these others need the scope. Right? They go inside of a name. I don't know if they can actually go inside of iBucket. Bucket dot collection dot collections dot create collection async. Just take an actual scope. What's a collection spec? Scope name and a name. Okay. So that always takes a name. But that's okay. We have scope. Scope does have name on it. But I'm going to get even further away. And again, why am I doing this? Well, I'm doing this because I want to clean up how I set up the tenant. I want to make sure it's repeatable. I want to make sure it's extendable. And I don't want to have a load of code hacked in there when I come around to this. Again, the purpose of this entire prototype right now is to figure out some of these challenges. And that way I can confidently move forward with my product design and know all the. So if I'm writing a story and it is, as a product manager, I need to be able to add a card or add a ticket, and I need to be able to capture the information about the user. I need to capture the information about the company that it's attached to. I need to do all sorts of other things, right? Then I don't have to focus on the technology I'm using to access that data. I just need to focus on the design of that data, and I can move forward at a better pace than if I have to figure out all the technology stuff on the fly. If I have to figure this out for a single story, right? If I come in and I need to initialize a new tenant and I've got to copy that code in there, then the likelihood is I'm going to move forward at a pace. Most greenfield architectures I've seen like start with a mess because they have been developed to achieve the problem at the same time as figuring out the challenges of how they're going to achieve the problem. So I'm just trying to narrow that down so that my initial code base is more adaptable in the future and cleaner to begin with. It's not going to be perfect, but it just needs to be easier for me to base my stories off of so I can actually build effective stories and have no no major technical hurdles to overcome early on in development, because I think that's where side projects go to die, is the I'm stuck on this. Okay, I'll move on. So I prefer this design, but I've still got dependency injection. I'm now making my context responsible for my service provider. Which is bad. If I flip this and I put that, that's an option. But I don't want to overcomplicate these. The idea of having them do their thing is appealing. That adds a collection, it doesn't do any data. That adds a collection, then waits until the bucket's ready. Probably not the right thing to do there. Then gets the scope and then adds the data. So initially, this is actually work item context. Right. The work item context is my DB context. So var unit of work equals context dot begin. Then identifier. Right. Right, that takes a grid. Right, it knows that that's a grid. So now my unit of work, so that goes away. That goes away. That is add. That works. And now this is the only other piece that is not obvious. What if I make that an extension? So what I'm doing here is I'm working kind of backwards a little bit. I'm trying to tidy up these behaviors into more reasonable things so I can actually verify what dependencies do I actually have here. Because if it's I have a dependency on a scope or I have a dependency on whatever, then I can term that as I can kind of put a create scope, right, or create tenant in my work item and then give it initialization actions. So the actual new tenant initializer doesn't happen. And then these additional things can be generated differently, right? In which case the initializer concept is only I don't need to nest them. I just need to pass them. So the independence that will work on me there. Again, anybody watching, if you have any questions about what I'm doing, if you don't agree with what I'm doing, if you think I'm going crazy, let me know. So maybe that is a unit of work behavior, right? Because the unit of work is scoped to the to the scope. It's not to the collection. This will add tenant information with the document ID. Document ID comes from I have a collection document base object that I inherit from, which takes the grid, and the document ID is the name of the collection, : ID. So I can track that. Yeah, it might be right, it may be wrong, I don't know. It's consistent. Tenant information, : Oh, there we go. Yeah. Colon. So what do we do? What do we do? This is part of the unit of work, right? So Couchbase unit of work, public async value task default index P. That is this code. Leave that there. So that would require that. Oh, yes, I remember this now. So var collection equals that. We'll come back around on this in a second. This is not ideal. It relies upon some jankiness. Convention. I'm not a fan of hidden behavior where possible. I'm okay with abstract behavior, but I'm not okay with hidden behavior and weird assumptions like, hey, your collection, right? And this is one this makes, right? Your collection here has to be called the same as your model, right? Now I do have this that I added on, but you can't get that if you only have the type. So the other way of doing this is this, which I'm going to have to do. Okay. We'll come back around that in 1 second. Okay, so await unit of work to add default index for tenant information. Kind of like that. 4 members up. I'll give it to my unit of work. That will mean that that's available now. And then the only other thing we need there is, yeah, a little bit of stuff. This actually now we can do. Oh wait, so we can. So CTOR. This isn't going to be perfect. I'm not going to get this done today, but I am going to try and get the next 5 minutes because I got to finish up. I'm going to try and get this tidied up and working. So I'm okay with the unit of work containing this because it's scoped to that tenant, right? So it's okay for that to happen. I'm not terribly upset about that. The work item context, we're going to come back around on that. The work item context does the begin, so it initializes our scope. If we could test to see if a scope existed, we could actually generate the scope here. So begin will actually create the scope, which is a side effect, but is that really that bad? In the scheme of things, we do need one more thing. We need a collection attribute. So Entity Framework has the data attributes. You can attach them to the model, or you can use on model creating configurations to define the model. So if your collection name doesn't match the plural of your entity, then you can override it. I just don't want to start with the pluralization stuff yet. I probably want to come back around on that afterwards, so that I don't have to do this. But collection public string. Yeah. So I'm doing that so I can do this. I can go here. I can do collection tickets. I can get rid of that. Get rid of that. Oh, of course I can have break right before the end. That gives me that. That's a problem. Yeah, that's another design issue. We can come around on that in a second. I've got an idea for that one straight away. So that's ticket, and that's collection is tenant information. That's not a plural. I don't want it to be a plural. No, that's right. Not gonna never get it. Okay, so I'm basically cascading through problems. It's not really where I want it to be, but anyway. So now the challenge there lies in that I have the add. The Couchbase unit of work now breaks because now I can't get the entity collection type. So we need to do a little bit of reflection, and this might be somewhere I can learn code gen. Because maybe this is somewhere where I can learn something. Because realistically, what I want to do is I want to do something like that, entity collection, but in this case, I don't have that name, right? So OBS restarted. Oh, maybe it's because it came back from my break. I don't know. Either way, my apologies if you saw an ad and you're actually not paying attention. I'm thinking CodeGen might be a way to do this in the end, but I haven't learned anything about CodeGen yet, so that would be a hard challenge. Basically, what I now need to do is where I have this collection async, I need to go and get the name off of the type. So I need to do a little bit of reflection. Let's see, infrastructure, pipe extensions, like that. Let's do public static string get collection name. That works for me. I don't remember. I don't remember saying that that's what I wanted. Like, I don't know where. Wow. Okay. Let's just move on. So this would be get collection name, right? Now. So a little bit of reflection is not going too fast. Also collection name dot to lower invariant. Okay. So those two work now because now I've specified the collection on the actual model. So I have the type. Now, tenant information, we'll worry about this in a second. So document ID is another one where I need to, this is a extension, public, that's too clever this time. Get document ID, this T document. Yeah, like that. Okay, I'll take it. Okay. So now that is entity dot get document ID. Nice. That tidies that up. Actually, then I don't need that. The get document ID will take the ID of the document. So string document ID equals entity dot get document ID. That's then. Oh no, that's not what I want there. That should be type of p dot get collection name. And that should be document ID. So let's not create a variable where we don't need one. That's pretty transparent. Add now changes. So we don't need to pass in the entity ID because now it's a collection document which has an ID. Here we can get that. We can create an overload of this that takes a GUID. Right. And that needs, that's that. Let's worry about that afterwards. ID. So that is a GUID. Again, if you are watching and you are interested in doing it or want to ask some questions, please feel free. Okay, you didn't know that. But you didn't know that. So the problem there is I need to do ID there is the GUID. It's not doing the pending. That's the difference. So the document ID I put in there. Documents, document ID is tenant information, colon that. So it's document ID, but yeah, that's not going to be perfect. Oh, but I don't need to store the document ID anymore, right? So that's fine. That's actually perfectly fine. yes, document ID was only there to try and help me analyze it. So anyway, so that's that, and then that's get document ID of T, right? So that will transform it into the right type. So now with that there, we don't need that. We can move that inside of there. Get rid of that. Logger, we can worry about in a second. Actually, let's not put any try catches inside of the initializers. Let's put them on the outside, because if the initialization fails, I don't want to risk catching it and hiding it inside of an individual initializer and kind of proceeding. I want it to blow up and come back out and be able to alert the fact that a tenant initialization did not go well. And yeah, we'll worry about the rest. So I've cleaned up a little bit here. This one would create that, but we need a scope here, right? So similar to this. Actually, we could, what if that is not? Okay, I'm kind of rambling a little bit because I'm thinking through it at the same time, a million miles. So if I have async by task, um, initialize selection, right? Bring, and actually, for T, right, where T is a collection document, then this code here goes inside of here, right? So that's going to await, but that's not quite correct, because we're not got our bucket if we've got our scope. So var collection. So that's that. No, that's await. Scope. Create a collection. Oh man, I'm running out of time fast. Await scope dot. You cannot create a scope at that level. Bucket dot collections. So the challenge there would be, I could only initialize a connection if I've got an administrative level of credentials. So this method would be unavailable unless I've got the right type of user. Do that. That's that. That's the spec. Tenant scope name, and that, oh yeah, scope dot name. So that creates a collection, and then await add await add default index. So that then becomes redundant. So where I'm heading here is, and this entire stream has been kind of a journey of tinkering and experimenting, right? I'm perfectly fine with throwing away all the code I've written
to get back to an obvious solution. And the obvious solution is I'm trying to design an API here. I don't need an API. And it's dawned on me as I've been writing that. What I need to do is in some way say await context dot initialize tenant. Right? But that doesn't need to do anything other than take an event dot that. And then it needs to do await context dot begin with the tenant identifier. Right? And then context dot so this is a unit of work var don't think that is no, it's not responsible. Okay, but either way, unit of work dot four members up. Unit of work dot initialize collection of tenant information. Await unit of work dot initialize collection of ticket. Right. Tenant information. The only difference is I add this in. Right. So now I do await unit of work. I do that. This is event tenant identifier event dot name. There we go. Right. I don't need. So the only method I need is this to create a scope. And even then, I'm not too sure. I can't do that in here and begin. If the scope's not available, generate the scope. So yes, it would be nice to do all the initializer stuff, right? But at this point, I can delete all that code. Right? I don't need any of this. The only thing I need is this. But my tenant information has the name there, the collection name there, the name there. I've cleaned up the API. I am working within the scope of a tenant. This default index doesn't necessarily need to be there now, right? But it's kind of nice. And I can initialize a collection with this, and there's my bucket. So I could pass in Couchbase configuration, that there, because now my work item context does know about that. So let's remove this configuration. So I do know the configuration. Even on begin, I wait for the bucket to be ready and wait for the cluster to be ready. So I don't necessarily even need to do it inside of the work item there. But I now have those available if I need them. Let's remove that for this second. So a bit of a journey, a bit of a time sink overall. I don't need service provider there now. Let's remove that. Let's make 100% certain that is not necessary. I have my cluster provider, my logger, my configuration. That is injected into my work item context. And I can begin doing that. If I want to mess around with transactions, I can do that later. But what are you still whining about? Work item context does not need initializer. Our unit of work gives us atomic actions to the things.
query and stuff we'll worry about later, right? I've yet to get to that point. We don't need to do this. Yeah, this is the only line we need. I kind of want to do this. I need to finish the stream because I've got work. But this is the line we need. The tenant scope name is literally just the GUID of the tenant. Right? It is the scope of this tenant. But what can I do there? What can I do? There's no way of saying scope exists. Is it harmful? Absolutely. Go to implementation. Okay, so create scope. Post. If it's okay. It already exists. We get a scope. We throw a scope exists exception. So it is harmful to call it every time. Is there a get scope? Bucket name, scope name, yeah. Okay, so go to implementation. Oh, pools defaults. Okay, so that's find use agreements. Get scope. So get scope with a scope name. Okay, obsolete. Use get all scopes instead. Ugh. Scopes. So I kind of don't want to put that in here because it is scoped to that, right? So that belongs in here. So let's create initialize. Disappear. Task. Initialize tenant. There we go. The funny thing is that this stream started with a method called initialize tenant on the work item context. So yeah, that's amusing that I've come back full circle to a method called initialize tenant. However, it has allowed me to analyze everything else I've been doing, hopefully clean it up. And if this compiles before the end of this stream, I'm going to see if it works. So we get the cluster, right? In here, all we realistically need is this. Need a bucket. Now this is being fed from the concept that a single service is aligned to an individual bucket, right? So there's no blurred lines, right? It's the bucket represents the type of work, the type of collections we're going to be working with. Therefore, to me, it makes sense to have a bucket at that level in the configuration. Okay, so we are going to basically do those string tenant name equals tenant identifier to string if bucket.get wait oh equals await. That shouldn't happen though. You're initializing the tenant, so I don't care. No, I don't care. Right? Because now this code is literally initialize the tenant, which creates our scope. We then begin unit of work, so we have that. The only difficulty may be, yeah, that's that. Yeah, delete initializers. We can delete initializer. So we spent a significant amount of time writing that code, but whatever. We can remove initializers there. We don't need initializers. That. I'm feeling okay about this so far. So there's no magic now, right? That's my purpose of this, right? I didn't want to hide the behavior. I want it to be very visible. So what does a tenant created handler do? It initializes a tenant, it begins a unit of work, it initializes a collection on the tenant information and a ticket, and then adds the tenant information. No overload for add. Oh, because now that's even simpler as well. Because the collection is dealt with. Right? So one of two things happens right now. It collapses in a pile or it initializes a new tenant. So let's see where that is, and then we'll finish up. Again, if you're watching and have questions, feel free. There is a Discord available if you want to join that. Yeah. Interested, you can join Discord. Okay. So did all that refactoring work. So this what I just did is I started all the projects necessary for this to come together. So it starts up all the APIs and it starts up the consumer, which is the piece we've been directly working with upstream. So if I send that, this will succeed. Is this piece that may not succeed. So we go to tenants 782 P63. We go over here 782. It almost worked. It almost worked. So I didn't break very much. But you'll notice there's no documents here. Right? So nothing was drastically affected that I haven't hit before. What happened was I have missed a weight somewhere in here. Because it seems that Couchbase is extremely temperamental. Oh no, it crashed. It crashed. Key space found, not found. Okay. So it's not that bad. It's not that bad. Create primary index async failed. The problem with getting into this was bound to happen. So initialize collection probably should not add the index as well, right? Which is okay. It doesn't have to do that. We can worry about that later. But that definitely failed while trying to deal with the index. One more try, I promise. And then I do have to go. Yet another budget. Foreshadowing. So I will aim to stream through the week.
from a similar time, from about 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Eastern. I have to be more disciplined at the end. I do have two small puppies, getting bigger puppies, that I do have to take routinely out during the morning, so it may be very broken up at times. But in general, no, it failed again. So there is some weight problem. There is a weight problem with the times there. So 709, they probably created the tenant just fine. Yeah, there you go. But there is an order that Couchbase is implemental over, which I may reach out to them to find why. Maybe it's the API, maybe it's my usage of the API. But what's happening is this get collection ID by name. So when I add this document, this collection isn't available yet. And that triggers the problem. Yes. Okay. So unfortunately, that is me for today. I have to finish up and go get ready for work. Drop in the Discord if you'd like to. If you have any questions, you can ask those questions in there. I will be continuing to stream this as routinely as I can, longer times on weekends and vacations. But yeah, this is a success for today. This is a nice refactor and a nice journey around. So thank you very much for joining me. Take care, and I will see you again soon. Go on.